Hello, my miraculous friend, and welcome to another episode of the Magnify Your Miracles podcast. I am Reverend Frances Faden, and I am so grateful that we get to spend this time together helping you to magnify your miracles. And today we're going to be talking about something truly miraculous, a real life miracle story from a place I didn't expect. And if you are an aspiring writer or a writer, or you know you have a story in you that is waiting to come out, this episode is absolutely for you. You know, the Magnify Your Miracles podcast is for highly sensitive and highly creative spiritual entrepreneurs and people that are ready to step into being a bright light on the planet. And one of the key things you can do that is to start to share your story. So we're going to be talking about such an amazing miracle story, in my opinion, from the author Anne Frank. And she started making her presence known to me about 6 months ago, and I had no idea why. And over time, I've been getting to know Anne as she's been revealing herself to me and kind of guiding me and really acting like a spirit guide to me. And I'm going to be sharing some of those stories with you and the message that she actually has for you for all the aspiring writers. So before we do that, let's take a breath together. Let's get ourselves calm, knowing that whatever we need to hear today is exactly what we're going to need to hear. As we focus on our breath, we allow ourselves to just let go of whatever happened before, whatever might come later, and just come deeply into the now. There we go. We start to feel that divine presence. And let's take one more deep breath together in gratitude, and we can begin. All right, my friend. Well, I am recording this in November of 2023. I don't know when you're going to be listening to it. But unfortunately, over the last month, world events have just been heartbreaking, just heartbreaking. And as an interfaith minister, I just, it just is heartbreaking to me to see the rise in anti-Semitism, to see the rise in anti-Muslim rhetoric, to see the rise in anti-anything is just heartbreaking for me, but especially when it's around religion and spirituality, it's just heartbreaking. And about 6 months ago, I would say, I started noticing Anne Frank making her presence known to me. And it started with watching a really well done miniseries. If you have access to Disney Plus, I think it was produced by National Geographic. It's called A Small Light. And it is based around the story and the life of Miep Gies, who is one of the people that helped to hide the Frank family during World War II, during the Nazi occupation of Amsterdam. And it's so well done. It's so well done. So just even from a story perspective, I highly recommend that you watch it. But also, if you're somebody who right now is feeling just overwhelmed by the enormity of what's going on in the world, watch this, because Miep says it's like you can be a small light in a dark room. You can do one small thing and you can really make a big difference. And I really take that to heart, because everybody's wired differently in terms of how we're meant to be responding to things. So it was through this particular series that I started feeling like, oh, Anne Frank. Now, I read The Diary of Anne Frank when I was in high school, as most people do. And I've seen the movie and all that, and I know the story very well. But this telling of the story was really had a big, big impact on me. And probably because it's from the eyes of Meep, who's like watching it. So we kind of become her. And through this process, I started to recognize, and right around this time, I was also doing a lot of work with connecting with people on the other side. And I was reading Perdita's book about how you can connect with loved ones that have crossed over, and all this stuff going on, and really learning about how when souls cross over, they really want to help. So all this is happening at the same time that Anne Frank is making her presence known to me. So I started diving in a little bit more, and I visited the Anne Frank House Museum online. I didn't actually go to it, but if you go to the Anne Frank House, I think it's annefrank.org. It's an amazing treasure trove of information and the timeline and everything that they have there. They did such an amazing job of really keeping the energy and the story of Anne and her family alive, which I love. So I went on there and I started looking at her story and how she received her diary when she was 13. And I'm looking and I'm reading more about her story, and I'm like, oh, first of all, I think she's a patron saint of aspiring writers. Absolutely. She's probably a patron saint of a lot of things, but I'm going to just say she's a patron saint of aspiring writers for sure. And then as I was reading her story, I was like, oh, Anne is actually somebody who manifested a miracle, her miracle. Now, it might not be the miracle all of us wish that she manifested, but I started looking at what she did. Now, if you listen to last week's episode, you'll know that I talked about the one thing that blocks your manifestation, and the one thing that blocks the miracles from happening is cross currents. Is when we want something, but then we have a belief or a voice that tells us why we can't have it or that we shouldn't have it, or we have conflicting beliefs like I want this, but I also want this, and then they cancel each other out. So Anne really wanted to be a writer. That was her thing. And I'm going to share her story with you to really inspire you, because I believe she came to me so that I could pass this on to you, all of you who are listening and who are aspiring writers as well. And Anne really followed the steps of miracles and manifestation. So she got this journal when she was 13. She really wanted to be a writer. And they went into hiding, and she wrote every day. And she wrote in her journal. And here's what she did that most people don't do is she acted like a writer. And even in up until 1944, she started thinking about, boy, wouldn't it be fun to publish a story about the secret annex? And that's what she called her book at first. She started compiling her writings and pulling different things out and changed the names of some of the people as if they were going to be characters in a book, and called it the secret annex. And she was acting like a writer right up until the time that her family was discovered. And her vision and her dream was to be a famous published author and to have her work go out into the world. And she had visions of Hollywood and the whole nine yards. Because, she's 14, 15, she's a teenager. And she just was really into that. So the next thing I'm sure as you know her story, is that they get found out, the family gets found out, the house is raided, they get taken away. And Meep actually finds the diary and her writings and holds on to it, because they don't find out for about a year what happens with everybody. It's 9 months to a year, something like that. So they get found out in August, and then August of 1944. And then unfortunately, Anne is so sick and she passes away in the concentration camp in March, I believe, of 1945. And she and her sister both end up passing away right before the liberation, right before the Allies come. And her father is the only one who remains out of all of them. He's the only one that remains. And he comes back to Amsterdam. And Miep is the one who gives him the diary. And he didn't even know it was there. He has a lot of mixed feelings about it, but he reads it and he's like, oh my God. And he's got to know his daughter completely in a different way, and decides that it needs to be published. Now, you can read more about that if you want to go to the Anne Frank house and read the story. It's an amazing story, and I highly recommend that you go, and I'll put it in the show notes, Anne Frank house, so that you can visit it if you choose to. But as I was reading the story, everything jumped out at me about how this young girl, who was under the most adverse circumstances, became one of the most widely read authors of all time. And I did a little bit of research, and I found out that her book is considered the most widely read book, second only to the Bible. Almost everybody has read her book. So how does a girl who's in hiding from the Nazis during World War II become one of the most famous authors in the world? How did she manifest her vision? And her book even goes to Hollywood, and Diary of Anne Frank, or Diary of a Young Girl, it was called back then, becomes a play that's done in high schools across the world. How did this happen? Well, I'm sharing it with you not to make light of any of this. Please understand, I'm not making light of any of this. I think that this is a really profound thing, that Anne, in my opinion, was a really high soul who came here to be such a blessing for the world. And I wish the story ended differently. Absolutely. I would have loved to have read all of her books. Unfortunately, her books passed with her, but she did leave us her. And what a blessing she did. So the first thing that Anne did to really experience this miracle and to bring this miracle to the world is she got really clear about what she wanted. She really wanted to be a writer. No doubt about it. No question about it. She really wanted to be a writer. The second thing she did that was really important is she started acting like a writer. She started acting like one. She got up and she started writing. And she didn't let her circumstances define her. How many of us say, oh, I'll do it when I have more time. I'll do it when the kids are out of school. I'll do it, do it, do it. And Anne didn't do that. Anne didn't say, I'm going to wait until after the war is over and then I'm going to write. Anne wrote from the time she got that journal. And in many ways, writing was the thing that helped her cope with everything. I know that she was a Gemini, and so I can only imagine what it was like for a Gemini to be cooped up in that little space that they were in, and she had to share a room with somebody and didn't have privacy, like all the things that we tell ourselves that we need to be able to step into our dream as a writer. She didn't have any of those things. What she had was the desire to do it. And part of it was the thing that she was holding on to that was like, when this is all over, I'm going to have this. And thank God she did, because we have a firsthand account. There are a lot of people that deny what happened around the Holocaust. There's a lot of people that say things didn't happen. A lot of people, personally, I feel like that's coming from people who can't deal with reality, that they just are like, no, 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 that didn't happen. And here we have a young girl who wrote it down and is like, look, it happened. And not only this is what happened, this is how it impacted me. And then she goes on to share her inner life. And even at the end of it, she's like filled with hope of like, despite everything, I still think that people are good. What a powerful, powerful message for somebody who was for 2 years cramped in a tiny space with all these other people, hungry a lot of the time, deprived of everything, not able to go outside. And yet she wrote down her story. Now, when I started working with Mother Mary a while ago, one of the things she said to me was, the most healing thing that you can do for the world is to tell your story, to tell your story. And I believe that. When she first said it, I was like, really? Is that really true? And as I've watched it, I've come to believe that really is 100% the truth, because the world is made of stories. And when you share your story, you never know who you're going to impact. You never know who needs to hear that story and who's going to relate to you. And you might even save somebody's life. You might inspire somebody to go out and do something that they never thought that they could do, simply by sharing your story. And this applies with Anne, who wrote down her story, and she wrote down her experience. And her intention, I believe, was so strong that even after, the Nazis, they did away with her body, but they couldn't touch her spirit. And her dad and Miep as well wanted her legacy to live on. And so they went through the process of getting it published, and they did. And then it's been published, and it's been republished, and it's been published in every language, and it's been made into a movie several times. And it's still such a powerful, powerful story. And that's the power, my friend, of writing down your story. That's the power of taking something and putting it into what I call a tangible form, or a consumable form, where you take your story and you put it and you write your book. Whether it's a little thin book or it's a big book, whatever it is, it's your story of how you got from here to here, or your inner experience and what you've learned from life, or whatever it might be. Your story matters. And we can follow the energy of Anne, and you can get really clear that you're a writer and that that's what you want to do, or that that's the next thing that you're going to do. I'm not going to put you in a hole and say that's the only thing you are. You can say, I'm really ready to step into my shoes as a writer. And then the next thing to do is write. And then after that, as you're writing, you continue to dream, which is what she did. As she was writing, she was planning for the publication of her book. She was planning for the publication of her book. Did she herself do it? No. Life had a different plan for her. Fate had a different plan for her, unfortunately. But she was planning for her book to be published. And guess what? It was. And not only was it published, but it's become the most widely read book other than the Bible. And her story made it to Hollywood, which is where she wanted to go. And she became a famous Hollywood movie. From a girl that was 13 years old, 14 years old, 15 years old, dreaming, somebody who was hiding away in an occupied country under the probably some of the worst circumstances that you and I can't even imagine. And yet she showed up anyway. This is the message that Anne Frank has for you, my friend. Whatever it is that you're waiting for, don't wait. Start your book. This is why next week I have invited onto the podcast a really wonderful writing coach. And she's going to be talking about how to write your book, how to get started, how to organize your ideas, how to organize your thoughts so that if you're feeling confused, you'll know where to start. Writing a book can feel like a really big, how's it going to happen? It can feel really, really big. It can feel really scary, which is one of the reasons I am such a big advocate of having a writing coach, having somebody help you, because it can also be a lonely process. So tune in next week when we'll be talking about actually how to do that. But for this week, I'm going to ask you to really think about the power of Anne Frank and her decision to become a writer. And that all these years later, that she would tap me on the shoulder and ask me to share this message with you, that you're meant to be a writer, whatever aspiring writers are out there. And again, you don't have to say, I'm going to be a writer, like you're going to start writing poetry or something, unless that's, of course, what you want to do. But if you do nothing else, write your story. Write your story. Don't let other people write your story, whether you're going to pass it down to your children or your grandchildren, or you're going to publish it, or you're going to use it as a way to market your business, whatever it might be. I love books, and I love that books are going to live on way beyond all of us. And that 100 years from now, someone is going to read your book and they're going to be like, wow, if she could do it, I could do it. Or wow, I never thought that somebody could go through something like that in such a unique way. Your story matters. Your story matters. So I'm encouraging you to tune into the energy of our good friend, Anne Frank, and to grab on and borrow some of her enthusiasm and her clarity. Decide that you're going to tell your story. Start acting like a writer. Start showing up. Start doing the thing. And continue to make plans and acting as a writer. This is the key to magnifying your miracles. Now, if you don't want to be a writer, if you want to be a musician, or you want to be a painter, or you want to be an entrepreneur, or you want to be a mom, it doesn't matter. The process is the same. You get clear about what you want, you make the decision, you start acting that way. Remember, what do I say? Your miracle's already here. You start acting as if your miracle's already here. You start to embody that energy, and the universe starts to draw to you the resources to make all of that happen. Of course, I wish, as we all do, that there was a different miracle for Anne. I really am like, oh, I think about it and I just get so sad when I think of her story. And of course, all the stories of what happened, and even what's happening now all around the world, where people are losing their opportunity to live out their story. They're losing their opportunity to tell their story. But you have that opportunity. If you're listening to this podcast, we can be in sorrow, and we should honor those that are not able to do it. But the best way to honor them is for you to do it. If you have the opportunity to tell your story, my friend, tell your story. It's an honor that not everybody gets. And if you can hear me and you're listening to this, I highly encourage you. And what is it that you need? What is it that you need to get going? Tune in next week. And if you have questions for the writing coach, let me know. And I will be asking her those questions. But in the meantime, start writing. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start writing. I write on and off, but I feel like Anne Frank is tapping me on the shoulder and letting me know that nobody is promised tomorrow. Write today, talk today, paint today, do your thing today. The world is counting on you and your story. Do your part to heal the world by sharing your story. That's what Mother Mary asks us to do. All right, my friend, thank you so much for being here. I really want to hear if you're inspired to start sharing your story. If you're going to start writing, I know you have a lot of stories in you to share. You probably have more wisdom in you than you could possibly imagine. So let me know in the comments how you feel about this topic. And do you have a special connection with somebody like Anne Frank? Or maybe there's a different energy that's made itself known to you? Do you have a favorite writer that has really inspired you, or somebody? Or what are you going to say yes to? What are you going to say yes to? And not wait until your circumstances change. What are you going to say yes to now? Even if it's for 5 minutes a day, what are you going to say yes to? That's what I want to know. My friend, remember that the key to magnifying your miracles is knowing that your miracle is here and acting as if your miracle is already here. And we will see you next time on the Magnify Your Miracles podcast, where we're going to be talking about how to write your book. God bless you, my friend. Bye-bye.